I'm Debbie Kilday from the National Beat Poetry Foundation, and I'm here to spotlight an artist today, Carlo Parcelli from Hyattville, Maryland. Hi, Carlo.
Hi, Deb. Hyattsville, Maryland. Yeah,
Hyattsville.
yeah. People familiar with it. It's virtually on the DC line, on the Washington DC line.
So, Carlo, how did you begin writing?
Well, it was the Vietnam War was raging. I wrote all throughout my childhood, but the Vietnam War was raging in 1966, and I decided I better go to college and try to get a 2S, or they're going to draft me. So I hadn't taken the SATs, but I established a Maryland residency and went to the University of Maryland, where I met a professor, Dr. Rudd Fleming, who, among other things, he was a Joyce scholar, James Joyce, but among other things, he had translated Greek drama with Ezra Pound for 10 years when Pound was at St. Elizabeth's here in Washington, D.C., incarcerated in St. Elizabeth's. So he saw some of my work and he said, well, you might benefit by writing in the canto style, in Pound's canto style, which is right here. Yeah, there we go. And so I began doing that. And of course, if you work in the canto style, you're eventually going to encounter Charles Olson. Charles Olson here, these are the Maximus poems. And another poet, high modernist poet, who visited Pound when Pound was at St. Elizabeth's. And one of the things that Olson did was he had a reading list for Ed Dorn, the poet who wrote the great poem Slinger, and who I read with. I had the honor of reading with when I was younger. And in that list of that reading list, one of the texts he mentions is Process and Reality by the British philosopher Alfred Lord North Whitehead. And Whitehead and Russell, of course, did Principia Mathematica, but Whitehead did a groundbreaking book called Process and Reality, which is, there's my earliest copy here. And in that book struck me. Let me back up a little bit. I was studying quantum theory at the time, and I run across a young woman who was a mathematician, and her boyfriend ran the cyclotron at the University of Maryland, which at that time was one of the more advanced particle accelerators in the country. So I started to hang out with the graduate students to learn more about quantum, because quantum was really in the air at the time, quantum theory. And of course, it had been in the air for decades, but it was really advanced. There were numerous advances taking place. So I began to hang out with the young physicists. So I decided, well, I better get a grounding in philosophy, even though I was a lit major. So I began to sit in on philosophy classes. I sat in on a class on Hegel and a class on Kant, and the professors were great. They said, as long as you don't interrupt the class, yes, just sit in on them. And so as I began I wanted to create a poem that fused, at that time, used Pound's canto style to fuse poetry, philosophy, and physics, and quantum theory or science. For me, science was quantum theory at that time. Mm-hmm. And so among the philosophers I began to study were the phenomenologists. And a really very critical book for me in my thinking was this book by Edmund Husserl. And it's called The Crisis of the European Sciences and Transcendental Phenomenology. And along with him, there was his student, of course, everybody knows this guy, the fascist Martin Heidegger, Being in Time. But anyway, those books were extremely useful in my thinking, but also it was disturbing because there was an element of apocalypse to it. I began to come to some conclusions about the atomic bomb, nuclear weapons, and climate change very early on, which now people have adopted some of the principles that were nascent in my thought at the time. But anyway, for the first, say, 35, 40 years of my writing career, I wrote cantos in that fashion, and published very little, because it really just came down to reading constantly. Other influences, many, hundreds of influences, negative and positive, flooded into the work. And it's it's a very difficult kind of poetry, beyond difficult in a certain sense. And I want to just make one, and the Frankfurt School was central too. This is a copy of Dialectic of Enlightenment by Horkheimer and Adorno. Also Horkheimer's Critique of Reason. But this only scratches the surface of the reading involved. So I did that for years, and I got tired of doing it. I was really getting nowhere. No one knew what I was talking about. Certainly no publisher of poetry was going to adopt that. That was just, even though it had the canto flavor to it, after a little brief flame of recognition, I totally flamed out, mostly because I never showed up for anything, and I never was involved in the poetry community. But anyway, we did get involved in the poetry community in the sense that we started a magazine, a literary magazine called FlashPoint, and we did it for 17 years. And the staff we'd always talked about one of our favorite poets, who was David Jones. And he's a British Welsh poet. He was a British Welsh poet and engraver, and he spent 4 years in the trenches in World War I. And he really did come out of the kind of poetry that we were embodying at the time. Pound, Eliot, Zhukovsky, Mel Tolson, Olson, people like that, and it was a favorite of Eliot's and published by Faber, but very little known. But actually what happened was, we were talking about doing this issue of David Jones' work, and at Georgetown University here in DC, somebody gave an enormous bequeath of Jones material to the university. So all the scholars from the US and all the scholars from Britain came over to see this at Georgetown, and held a 2-day symposium where everyone delivered papers, and there was one gentleman made a film of Jones' life and that sort of thing. So we all got together and we decided, wow, why don't we publish all the papers in our magazine? This is ideal. So and to top it off, one of our staff members, Brad Haas, who teaches at a small Adventist college called Columbia Union College here in Tacoma Park, Maryland. He was a member of the Jones Society, so he knew everybody from Britain. He had made almost yearly pilgrimages to Britain. And so we all got together, yep, let's do it. And we published the magazine. So, of course, as I'm looking at all these papers we're going to publish, and I mean, who am I to edit these scholars? But, you pretend. And I said, well, let me go back and reread some of my favorite Jones, which I did. And as I was doing it, I was thinking about two poems that Jones wrote, and they're not typical. He wrote two major epics, at least in the world we were living in at the time. One is called, in parenthesis, about his experiences in World War I, and the other is called Anathemata, which is broader. It's really a kind of cosmology. But the poems that really influenced me at the time were two poems with narrators, and this is key to the work that I'm doing now, and that you guys picked up on, which and excites the hell out of me. But and they're called, one's poem's called The Wall, and the other is called The Fatigue. Now, and they appear in this little slim volume of fragments, Jones fragments, called The Sleeping Lord.
Okay.
And so So I did a reading, a dramatic reading of The Wall at Columbia Union College. This, like, for me, huge audience, maybe 400 people, and it became very controversial because the voice of these poems by Jones is a Principalis, a Roman centurion in Judea Perea at the time of Christ, and the Wall is about a very discontent Principalis, who's that be sort of like a sergeant, the level of a sergeant, or a minor lieutenant, and I did it as though he really didn't want to be there, which I think was really truthful, but apparently it became kind of controversial. So I said, I want to write in that style. I have to try it. So I did. So the consequently, what came out of that was, the Canaanite Gospel, which is what I think you guys heard me on YouTube doing and picked up on and liked so much and invited me up, which was like a godsend to me because I was dead. I was already in my literary grave. No one would give me a reading around here. They didn't know who I was. Generations had passed, and they had no idea who I was or how hard I'd worked, and didn't care really, apparently. So I was dead in the water here, and you guys kind of saved me. And that's where these monologues they take place at the same time. They take place in Judea Perea, in the time of Christ, and they're a rewrite of the New Testament, essentially. And there's 88 of them here, and there's 5 more in Bill DeVault's marvelous volume with my Isaac Newton poem, which is a major for me. There's 65 different voices, but 93 monologues altogether, or 67 different voices. So they're narrative in the same sense that David Jones' Principalis poems are narrative, and I'm still working in that style. I just love it. It's kind of rejuvenated me the way you're acknowledging them, the existence of them, have rejuvenated me, and that's really kind of the core of my story.
I have to say that when I first heard you, I was just completely fascinated by your style, I guess you would call it.
Yeah, David Jones, in parenthesis, he was in the trenches with a lot of kids from East London, so he heard a lot of Cockney, and I love Cockney as an accent. Guy Ritchie movies and what's his name, Alan Ford, and the more famous, I can't remember his name now for some reason, but I just love Cockney. So these are primarily in using the Cockney accent, which was kind of a conceit that a lot of people found kind of strange, but a lot of other people, I mean, you can do anything you want in poetry, isn't that right? I mean, that's basically what I'm always being scolded for. Don't tell people what to do, just yeah, I was really appreciative when you guys emailed me and said, you come on up and read, and that first reading in that dive bar was just priceless. That was so great.
That was in Middletown.
Yeah, that was tremendous. So I was hooked. You guys hooked me right there. I loved you guys after that.
Oh, we love you too.
Yeah, really.
So Carlo, do you want to read something?
Yeah, sure.
Everybody?
Yeah.
I would love to hear you read.
Yeah, I'll do 2 things, and they're both very long, so I'll only do the first 70 lines or so of each. And the first one is called Il est de pelleterer, And I don't know if you're familiar with Terrer. He was a French anomaly, a medical anomaly. He had this voracious appetite, would eat anything, including, he was actually accused of eating an infant in Lyon. Ate dead animals off this road raw. He just had this disease. But anyway, for a while he was a carny freak, as you can imagine. And this is in the voice of a carny barker. It's a carny barker. It's kind of a carny barker that goes off the rails, because it's 800 lines long. So I'll just do the first 7. I'll just do the first 70 or so. Et laisse de pelterer. Bien, venez tu. Come forfeit a sou, for tomorrow we flee the grand gutter of Paris. Over here, my friends, over here, witness but for inscrutable happenstance, bereft of craft or demon intelligence, of, say, the Saracen doodles of Laplace, or impieties of Descartes, or Louis Dedon, much less Bonaparte and the canons of Sablon. Put the palsy to your first glance, what testify our Terrer, bon chance, be the pride of France. A singular volley of nature's callous folly, who, self-wrought by famine, shunned the ambitions of a Napoleon, for his gross appetition confound any passion for war. His taste for blood be no armchair metaphor of some general's nutted and clouded armor. Oh yes, emperors may yearn, but tarry, as he gaze upon your pelt, yearn for far more, for none but to brush past immortality, to feast upon your mortal gore. Ask Laplace, ask the good count, to calculate the probability when such a creature, so grotesque in manner and feature, will pass your way again. Not since Erixithon ran foul of Demeter has such a curse confounded man. This freak, this Terrer, the issue of God's inchoate fury, whose hunger be an impregnable Bastille, liberty sanctioned by defect, hot to the touch, foul to the nose, an engine of consumption and waste, like the great maw of the puddling kilns at Crusoe, or the Jacobin crematoriums of Lyon. You want immortality? Here be its underbelly. You want the Almighty? Here be his scat. You want myth? Here be his mortal stench. For the Sioux, follow your news to its fetid cord. You want capricious nature? Behold, gentlemen, this gullet, this open sewer of this blighted creature. What scavenge the morgue at Lyon, as it be the Confessier Le Petit Chase, or the Apician banquet in Ictus or Rabelais. Come marvel at this sink, whose corroded studs snag his vast maw. Stare into his distended craw, if you dare, into the abyss, the rank well of his bow, lined with lesions and ulcers, and as wide as the Champs-Élysées. Clutch a rag against his sulphurous depths, and witness the ferment of a rendered hoof, a dead dog, or small child. Mind him disgorging a cat's fur, or shining shot, what prior be, lodged in a dragoon's shredded anatomy. Dauphin, old beggar, like God's judgment or Voltaire's, to our dear Terrer, it's all equal down there. What the Guineas and the Greeks levy an immortal soul, but a Sioux grant you the titillation of this engine of hell. Madame, raise your mouchoir. Mine is smell. That's the first section of that.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, it's like he's quite a character. I mean, I mean, there's a lot I could say about it. I don't know. I guess I should leave it at that. As I was reading, things were coming to mind, but they're slipping away.
Go ahead. Tell us.
Well, let me see if I can. Yeah. Um, I like one of the things you pick up. I picked up for a long in my earlier studies, especially from the Frankfurt School, the Horkheimer and Adorno, and to a large extent other phenomenology and other schools of philosophy, was an anti-enlightenment position. And if there's anything that Tarrare represents, is he does not fit into the Enlightenment perspective. That is, this is progress of human thought. It's this kind of we're always advancing, and this Cartesian notion that the accumulation of knowledge is bringing us to a kind of utopia, because what my studies had shown me earlier was this accumulation of knowledge was bringing us to a secular end times or end of the world. And so Tarrare takes on that whole load for me in this poem, and I was very surprised to I was just reading, looking for a voice that I wanted to express. I was very surprised I'd find something so ideal to that, but at the same time, so, so unexpected. You expected to find it in a philosopher, and then you take on his voice, but to find it in this poor soul who had no control over what he was and what he became. He died at 26. Of course he died, and he was so foul smelling that people couldn't get within 30 or 40 feet of him, because anyway, it was a miserable life, and it was so anti-enlightenment. There was nothing the Enlightenment could do for him, nothing. So it's a fascinating character.
Yeah.
And the next thing that I'd like to wrap it up with is another fascinating character, Peter Doyle. And people like to go on about Walt Whitman, what a great guy he was, what a groundbreaking poet, so on and so forth. But the truth of Walt Whitman was, he was a pedophile. He was driven out of his teaching position on Long Island because he was sodomizing young boys. And there's one newspaper article that talks about how he was tarred and feathered. He was an abolitionist, but he did not believe that African Americans deserved the franchise, that is, voting rights and full citizen rights, because they weren't intelligent enough. And he felt the American Indians were Native Americans were too weak as a race to survive, and had very, very hostile things to say about him. So it becomes a very complex psychology, because it's obviously Whitman was gay. He claimed to have 8 children, but if he had 8 children, he didn't know their names when asked and never seen them, then he's a deadbeat dad. So there's a whole cultural thing here. Why didn't you support these children? Support an obvious question. But that's kind of minor. I think the thing about Whitman was he was trying to do something very difficult, and that was to proselytize for his homosexuality. So in a way that he would at once be praised for his poetry, but at the same time could kind of P.T. Barnum his agenda into play, to kind of cajole. We had 72 million people voted for Donald Trump. Okay,
Yeah.
that was Whitman's audience. Outside of the voice of a few intellectuals, that was Whitman's audience. Those were the people he could fool with his jingoism about America. I don't think he believed a word of it, and lived in tremendous fear. So this piece is in the voice of Peter Doyle, and Peter Doyle was probably Whitman's major lover. He was for many years they were lovers, and Doyle was a streetcar conductor, working man, and here in DC. And so Doyle and he split up. But at one point, Doyle wrote a letter to Whitman threatening suicide because he was so miserable. Because being a homosexual in the 19th century, you could die. There was a certain tolerance for different sexual milieus, like suggestions that Lincoln slept with men because it wasn't unusual to simply, you didn't have enough beds, you just slept with men, and things happened. But by and large, it was still taboo, mainly because people had strict interpretations of the Bible, which they adhered to and thought it said that. So Doyle writes this letter to Whitman threatening suicide. It doesn't exist anymore, but a letter that Whitman wrote back to Doyle does, begging him not to do it. So what I've created here is Doyle's original letter.
Oh, wow.
Trying to deal with the psychology of it. And this runs 700 or 800 lines, but I'm just going to read the first 70 lines of this too.
Okay.
I think the final image is a killer, but that I'm trying to sell this. So you didn't know. But this is called Peter Doyle's suicide letter to Walt Whitman. Such be my proposal of love, as you so often turn from yourself, and in your last letter, in way of blandishment, turn from me, in my proposal of necessity, our hope to be together, most lie in a pact with death. Your poems make me sick with grief, that you would celebrate the forces that sunder us. Such be a bargain is summoned in that German Goethe's devil worship that Mr. Taylor so kindly provided. I think with more intent to caution than your boastful nature doth consider. Thy need for acceptance blind thee to our circumstance, not to turn us out, but to appraise in your poems a false text. It is no small thing, this persecution, so it be appalling how you pander to our oppressors in words truth cannot find, and all already dead to verity to save, nay, merely preserve your own skin. For salvation broach not such affect as to contrive your sword remain sheathed, lest you be branded of our persecuted tribe. What be thy multitudes, if not a roof for thy 6 bastard children? What angels be these that be not angels to thee? To castigate those so despised, not to marry or to excoriate Miss Branch for her contemptible lucubrations, raising up the bastard's natural franchise. To praise thy enemy, and to utterly falsify what is very born before you, all fact and natural disposition, what I bear witness driving me omni, and so can't be jingoed by the likes of you. What bear little contract with the common, like the petty and bigoted you praise. Or praise thee that scoundrel Johnson, what set the grey dogs upon freedmen, as they set upon you branded as Ham be, and so touched by God. No, Lincoln come to free us like the Lincoln come to free us like the niggers, and ask them what asset be this freedom among these shitheels. And for centuries to come, as my eyes be the measure, and not some blind ambition of poesy to find myself and you so far adrift, if ghost only in words. Fucking ask the black man what he see, and from what tree, before you loot the oratory of Ward Beecher and Cassius Clay. What you and I shared in your poem, you bugger Lincoln dead and not yet in his grave, that little black thing in the white, the dusky spot, and thus disguised, charm the public, yet by every kiss stolen, you make me a thief. Even now, I cannot speak frankly, lest I rouse the petty terror in my fellow men to confirm the dread they imbue within me. I honor greater spirits, more tenderly served every day in silence. I honor the rafters above my door that call me to peace. I honor the rope. I honor the chair kicked out in spasm.
Oh my God.
Yeah. A different take on Walt Whitman. Just a slightly different take. I think Peter Doyle makes a good case for himself there.
Mhm.
I think he should have had more of a voice. So I tried to give it to him.
Well, I think that's the whole reason why I started, the National Beat Poetry Foundation, is to give that voice to people that were not given a voice in the past.
You have so many appreciative people out there. Let me tell you. I mean, you really have rescued some fine writers, some fine people.
I just wish I could, spotlight them all. I'm working on it, one poet at a time, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I very much appreciate it. I very much appreciate this.
So what's in the future for you, Carlo? What are you working on now?
I'm working on a I'm working on a typically DC poem called Spook. And what it is it's a CIA agent, a former, he's retired, but he has an alcohol problem, as they all fucking do. And he likes to drink with the bums down at Lafayette Park in front of the White House. And he's been arrested. And this is he's been arrested many times, so he's very familiar with this sergeant who's down there, Sergeant Murphy. So it's in his voice. It's in this CIA agent's voice, and it's directed at Sergeant Murphy, and it's a tell-all. It's a way of getting all the shit that they did out there in a dramatic form, and uh, and um, uh, and just making it just get because he's so drunk, because he's so out of it. He likes Cutty Sark. He likes his scotch and gin. Um, that he's revealing the secrets as though the things that people want to dispute, involvement in the Kennedy assassination, the killing of that woman Meyer on the towpath in the DC, Bay of Pigs. One of the interesting things that came out was Bank just put up a little thing celebrating the murder of John Lennon, killing of John Lennon by Chapman, and the word that reaches the mind when you think of that is John Lennon. How senseless! I mean, why John Lennon? Come on, break shop, but the doorman at the Dakota was a man named Jose Padermo, and he was chief of operations for the assassination squad around the Bay of Pigs, Operation 40. He was the doorman at the Dakota, and he was seen chatting up Chapman just before Chapman killed Lennon. And so it kind of takes it out of the senseless. And I want to, you don't, putting it in this fictionalized narrative allows me to pretty much say what I believe happened with all of these incidences, from the Kennedy assassination, the killing of Meyer, Bay of Pigs, all the coups, all the way from Mossadegh and Arbenz, all the way up to the ones that just happened, Zelaya and Korea and the one in Ukraine, and all the coups that the CIA has done. So I'm just gonna like fly with it as long as I can. I mean, I could be. Do you think these are long? This could be like it's the CIA sins. It could be hundreds of pages. So, but I'm working on it now, and working really hard because it wasn't working to begin with, and I had to bring other elements in, like my good man Shakespeare, and get back a little bit to the English prosody, the Elizabethan prosody, I should say, of some of the monologues in the Canaanite Gospel, which I naturally drifted away from. But that's what I'm working on now. That's what I'm working on now.
So fascinating to listen to you every time I hear you speak, really.
Oh, thanks.
You have so many stories and ideas, and you're so knowledgeable of
That's a product of Rudd Fleming and writing in the canto style. And he said do early, because you have to read everything. I read that up on one of the sites, it might have been the National Beat site, somebody had a statement or kind of a quasi poem, and he called it the kitchen sink of modernism. And that's really kind of what it is. It's like, it's everything but the kitchen sink can go into the poem. So you really you have to stay. My daughter, I can remember my daughter she was in the drama club in high school, and I can remember waiting till like 9 or 10 at night, sitting in the hallway, reading whatever I was reading at the time, Hans Blumenberg or something, and making notes. And I saw every minute between work or every second I had went into just looking. And that hits something that's kind of core, because in the earlier work, I was looking for authoritative voices supporting my arguments, and ones that were against it too, but they were supporting the notions that I was coming to about a secular apocalypse and problems of quantification and mathematization of scientific culture and that sort of thing. What Petrium, what's his first name? He's a Russian sociologist, called quantifrenia, and that's the overuse of numbers in the social sciences. Well, I wanted to take that and apply that to the hard sciences, I got a lot of resistance. That's why one of the reasons I was ignored. The idea is so outrageous. Trying to prove it, it's even in my head sometimes I can't take the path to the proof. I'm going, oh, you're lost in the woods again. But some days it's very clear to me what I'm trying to say. But that really, the erudition is part of it, and you gotta be proud of your erudition. You can't go, oh, there's these poets out there that are against erudition and all of that, and you sound like you're prissy. Well, I'm not prissy. I was a guy that almost failed out of high school and had terrible grades, and would have died in Vietnam had I not fought my draft board for 5 years, and because they kept making me 1A when I wanted a 2S or a 1Y, or when I was married way back then, with a little child, when I wanted a 3A or whatever the deferments were. They kept denying me eventually. So it was a hell of a time. But it's the reading. The reading is important for me, and now it comes back to pay huge dividends, because as I'm working, I'm going, well, I want to work on this thing called The Spook about the CIA guy, but my one of our editors of our magazine, Jack Foley, is a big fan of Norman Mailer, so he tried to get me to read Harlot's Ghost, which is about a CIA guy, fictional, and I read half of it. I mean, it's huge. But it's now it occurred to me that Harlot's Ghost, would be very useful in the spook I'm doing. It's a ghost, it's a spook, it's a father figure, founding fathers, Lafayette Park. That's the Revolutionary War. Lafayette was the French. There's Rochambeau, a statue to Rochambeau, and Andrew Jackson is later, but he did Trail of Tears, Cherokee, genocide. That's what the CIA is all about. You go, wow, just things like that. They pay dividends, and if you know them, and maybe I shouldn't give this away, but this machine we're working on here, we're communicating on, is for somebody like me is a gold mine, because if I just remember the slightest fact, I can go look it up and spend the day reading about it, 2 days reading about it, and make poetry out of it. Upstairs, you can see behind is Rosalie's huge art book collection, several thousand books. Upstairs, I have this huge thing I used to call my machine. It's a room just full of books I had to use to reference, and still it wasn't adequate enough. But with this thing, you can do this kind of work. And it's funny, I don't want to go on too long about this. It's been strange to me that poetry went in exact opposite direction. I thought that people would, when you picked up the copy of the Cantos or David Jones or anything, people, if they came across a word they didn't understand, Princopalis or something, or a utile or whatever, they didn't know the word, they could Google it and they would understand it. And this kind of poetry would flower. It's not, it's dying. I died. The more the machine was there, the way of understanding what we were trying to do was there, the more quickly we died. It was counterintuitive, and but I'm still going to work. I'm still going to work in this way. You guys have meant everything really to me in the last 12 years. You and Mark Cunha, who took a chance and published the Canaanite Gospel. Those two things were key to my still being around. And I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome. So how can people get in touch with you or find your books?
Well, they can contact the publishers directly, or what they can do is they can go on Amazon or abe.com. They're all available there.
I'm going to put a link at the end of this video.
Yeah.
Also.
So yeah, all six of my books are available there.
Okay. And if they wanted to email you directly?
Yes, that would be Alphaville Books, one word, ALPHAVILLEBOOKS at Verizon.net.
Okay.
Yeah, and I really if somebody wants to invite me to read, I would really like that. So.
Well, if we ever get out of this pandemic, I'll invite you to read again.
Yeah, I'll put on a show for you guys anytime. Thanks, Deb.
Okay. Well, thank you, Carlo.
Yeah. All right. Take care now.
You too.
Say hello to Mike.
I will.
All right.
Bye-bye.